The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. In the sultry haze of a July afternoon in 1975, the name Jimmy Hoffa carried a weight that could crush men or make them tremble. James Riddle Hoffa, born on Valentine's Day, 1913, in the gritty coal town of Brazil, Indiana, was no ordinary man. He was a titan of American labor, a firebrand whose name was synonymous with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the most powerful union in the nation. By the time he vanished, Hoffa was a legend and a lightning rod, a hero to the working class, a villain to the government, and a dangerous enigma to the underworld. His disappearance from a suburban Detroit parking lot would become one of the most chilling mysteries in American history, a case that still haunts the nation's psyche, whispering of betrayal, power, and cold-blooded murder. Hoffa's rise was the stuff of American myth, forged in the crucible of hardship. His father, a coal miner of Pennsylvania Dutch descent, died when Jimmy was just 7, leaving the family to scrape by in the shadow of the Great Depression. By 1924, his mother had moved them to Detroit, Michigan, a city pulsing with the raw energy of the auto industry, where assembly lines churned and dreams of prosperity clashed with brutal realities. At 14, Hoffa dropped out of school to work as a stock boy, his young hands already calloused from labor. It was here, in the warehouses and loading docks, that he saw the exploitation of workers, the meager wages, the backbreaking hours, the indifference of bosses. It lit a fire in him, a righteous fury that would define his life. By his mid-20s, Hoffa was a force within the Teamsters Local 299 in Detroit, organizing truck drivers and warehouse workers with a charisma that could rally crowds and a ruthlessness that could silence dissent. He climbed the ranks with a blend of street smarts and unrelenting ambition, becoming the union's national vice president by 1952 and its general president by 1957. Under his leadership, the Teamsters grew into a juggernaut, boasting over 2.3 million members at its peak. Hoffa secured the National Master Freight Agreement in 1964, a landmark deal that standardized wages for truckers across North America. To the men and women who hauled goods across highways, he was a savior, a man who gave them dignity and a voice. But power like that doesn't come without a price. Hoffa's empire was built on a shadowy foundation. The Teamsters' massive pension fund, swollen with millions in worker contributions, became a piggy bank for organized crime. The mob saw opportunity in Hoffa's influence, and he saw opportunity in theirs. In the 1950s and 60s, Las Vegas rose from the desert on the back of Teamster loans, funneled to mob-controlled casinos. Hoffa was treated like royalty in Sin City, a kingmaker whose handshake could greenlight fortunes. But his alliances with figures like Anthony, Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit Mafia captain, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamster official tied to the Genovese crime family, were a devil's bargain. These men weren't just associates, they were predators, circling a man whose usefulness could expire. By 1975, Hoffa's star had dimmed, but his hunger for power burned brighter than ever. Convicted in 1967 for jury tampering, fraud, and conspiracy, he served nearly 5 years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, refusing to relinquish his grip on the Teamsters until 1971, when Frank Fitzsimmons took over. President Richard Nixon, in a move that reeked of political maneuvering, pardoned Hoffa in 1971, but with a catch. He was barred from union activities until 1980. To a man like Hoffa, who thrived on control, this was a death sentence to his legacy. He fought the restriction in court, but whispers grew that he was plotting a comeback, one that would shake the foundations of the Teamsters and the mob's grip on its riches. The motive for what happened next was as cold as it was calculated. Hoffa's push to reclaim the Teamsters' presidency threatened the delicate balance of power. Frank Fitzsimmons, his successor, was a pliable figure, a patsy for the mob, as some called him, happy to keep the pension fund flowing into their coffers. Hoffa, by contrast, was a wild card, too bold, too defiant, and some said, too willing to talk. Rumors swirled that he'd threatened to expose the mob's dealings, even hinting at cooperation with the feds to secure his return. To the Chicago outfit, the Detroit Mafia, and the Genovese family, Hoffa wasn't just a nuisance, he was a ticking bomb. The FBI's Hoffa's memo, later revealed in 2006, laid it bare. Hoffa's murder was likely ordered by organized crime figures who saw his ambition as a direct threat to their control over the union's $100 million pension fund. The cast of characters in this grim drama reads like a roster of underworld royalty. Anthony Giacalone, Tony Jack, was a Detroit mob enforcer with a smile that masked a killer's instinct. His brother, Vito Billy Jack Giacalone, was equally ruthless, a high-ranking figure in the Detroit family. Anthony Provenzano, Tony Pro, was a volatile Genovese capo whose falling out with Hoffa had turned personal, fueled by old grudges from their prison days. Charles Chucky O'Brien, a Teamster loyalist and Hoffa's foster son, was a trusted figure whose maroon 1975 Mercury became a chilling clue. And then there were the foot soldiers, Salvatore Sal Bergoglio, Provenzano's enforcer, his brother Gabriel, and Thomas Andretta, all New Jersey Teamsters with mob ties. These men moved in a world where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal was paid in blood. The stage was set in Detroit, a city of hard edges and harder secrets, where the auto industry's roar drowned out the whispers of violence. Bloomfield Township, a leafy suburb, seemed an unlikely backdrop for a crime that would echo for decades. Yet it was here, in the parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant, that Jimmy Hoffa would step into oblivion. The date was July 30th, 1975, and the air was thick with the promise of a reckoning. Hoffa's ambition, his defiance, his very existence had become a threat too great to ignore. The mob, with its tendrils in Detroit, Chicago, and New Jersey, had every reason to want him gone. And as the sun dipped low that day, the trap was set, waiting to snap shut on a man who thought he could outrun his fate. What makes this tale so chilling is not just the act itself, but the void it left behind. Hoffa was no saint. His hands were stained with the compromises of power, but he was a giant, a man who could sway millions with a word. His disappearance wasn't just a crime. It was a message, carved in silence and shadow. The mob's motive wasn't merely to kill, but to erase, to leave no trace of a man who dared to challenge their empire. As we step into the next chapter of this saga, the parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox looms, like a stage where the final act of a tragedy was played, a place where a man vanished and a mystery was born, one that still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who dares to look too closely. The sun hung low over Bloomfield Township, Michigan, on July 30th, 1975, casting long shadows across the parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant. The air was thick with summer heat, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel heavy with secrets. At 2 p.m., Jimmy Hoffa, the indomitable former Teamsters boss, stepped out of his green Pontiac Grandville, his eyes scanning the lot for familiar faces. He was dressed sharply, navy slacks, a white shirt, a tie knotted tight despite the heat, a man who wore his authority like armor. Hoffa was there for a meeting, one he believed would mend old wounds and pave his way back to power. Instead, he walked into a trap so perfectly laid it would swallow him whole, leaving behind a mystery that crackles with intrigue and dread. The Machu's Red Fox was no dive bar. It was an upscale haunt at 6676 Telegraph Road, where Detroit's elite sip martinis and cut deals over steak. Hoffa had chosen it for its discretion, a place where a man of his stature could meet without drawing eyes. He thought he was meeting Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mob captain with a shark's grin, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamster with a grudge as deep as the Hudson River. The meeting was supposed to be a détente, a chance to bury the hatchet after years of bad blood. Hoffa, barred from union activities until 1980, was itching to reclaim his throne, and he believed these men, dangerous as they were, could be reasoned with. But as the minutes ticked by, no one showed. By 2:30 p.m., Hoffa was restless, pacing the lot, his temper flaring. He made a call from a payphone at the nearby Ace Hardware store, his voice sharp with frustration. "Where the hell are you?" he reportedly snapped to an unknown listener. Those words, caught by a witness's ear, were among the last traces of Jimmy Hoffa. At 2:45 p.m., a maroon 1975 Mercury Marquis rolled into the lot, driven, some say, by Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son and a Teamster loyalist. Witnesses later described a car matching that description, with 2 or 3 men inside, pulling up near Hoffa. He approached, perhaps recognizing a face, perhaps lured by a promise. Then, in a heartbeat, he was gone. No scream, no struggle, no witnesses to a violent act, just a man erased from the world as if he'd never existed. The Pontiac sat abandoned in the lot, its keys still in the ignition, a silent witness to a crime no one saw. By 7 p.m., when Hoffa's wife, Josephine, called the restaurant in a panic, the staff could only confirm he'd been there. And then he wasn't. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa had begun, and with it, a saga that would grip the nation with a feverish mix of fear, fascination, and unanswered questions. The search kicked off with the urgency of a 5-alarm fire. Josephine Hoffa, her voice trembling with dread, reported him missing to the Bloomfield Township Police Department that evening. By nightfall, the lot was crawling with cops, their flashlights slicing through the dusk as they scoured for clues. The Pontiac yielded nothing, no blood, no fingerprints, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Hoffa had been plucked from the earth by an unseen hand. The police interviewed restaurant staff, patrons, even the hardware store clerk who'd seen Hoffa at the payphone. A woman reported seeing a maroon Mercury pull away around the time Hoffa vanished, a detail that sent a chill through investigators. Another witness, a truck driver, claimed he saw Hoffa in the passenger seat of a car speeding down Telegraph Road, but the sighting was fleeting, unconfirmed, a ghost in the twilight. By dawn on July 31st, the case had exploded into a national obsession. The FBI, already intimately familiar with Hoffa from years of dogging his every move, took the lead, dubbing the investigation Hoffa extortion. Agents descended on Detroit like a swarm, their trench coats and fedoras a grim contrast to the suburban calm of Bloomfield Township. They interviewed hundreds, waiters, Teamsters, mob associates, chasing whispers of a man who seemed to have dissolved into thin air. The media frenzy was relentless. Newspapers screamed headlines like, "Hoffa vanishes," and MobLink suspected. Television crews camped outside the Red Fox, their cameras hungry for any scrap of drama. For the public, it was a spectacle laced with morbid thrill. Hoffa, the larger-than-life union boss, had become a phantom, and everyone wanted to know where he'd gone. The early search efforts were a masterclass in desperation and dead ends. The FBI combed the parking lot with forensic teams, dusting for prints, scraping for fibers, but found nothing to anchor the case. They dragged nearby lakes, Orchard Lake, Cass Lake, hoping to find a body weighted with concrete, a mob signature. Divers surfaced empty-handed, the water yielding only silt and shadows. Bloodhounds were brought in, sniffing Hoffa's clothes for a scent, but the trail went cold at the edge of the lot. A tip led agents to a farm in Oakland County, where they tore up fields and barns, only to unearth nothing but dirt and frustration. Every lead felt like a taunt, every empty search a reminder of the mob's ability to make a man disappear without a trace. Theories multiplied like roaches in the dark. Some said Hoffa had been lured into the Mercury, driven to a nearby house, and executed. A single bullet to the head, his body disposed of in a way only the Mafia could manage. Others whispered he'd been taken to a meatpacking plant, ground into nothingness, or incinerated in a mob-controlled landfill. The most tantalizing lead came from a witness who claimed to have seen a car matching O'Brien's Mercury at a Teamster-owned garage in Detroit hours after Hoffa vanished. The FBI impounded the car, tearing it apart for evidence. They found a single strand of hair in the back seat, later identified through early DNA testing as possibly Hoffa's, but it wasn't enough for a conviction. The hair, like every other clue, was a maddening tease, a glimpse of truth that slipped through their fingers. As days turned to weeks, the case took on a life of its own, a dark carnival of speculation and dread. The FBI leaned hard on the mob angle, zeroing in on Giacalone and Provenzano. Both men had ironclad alibis. Giacalone was at the Southfield Athletic Club, getting a massage, while Provenzano was playing cards in New Jersey. But their alibis were too perfect, too rehearsed, like lines from a script written by men who knew how to dodge the law. The FBI hauled in Chucky O'Brien, whose tearful denials only deepened suspicions. "I loved Jimmy like a father," he sobbed. But his Mercury, His ties to the mob and his shaky timeline made him a lightning rod for scrutiny. The public ate it up, their imaginations running wild with images of double crosses and backroom deals. Was it a hit ordered by the Chicago outfit? A personal vendetta by Tony Pro? Or had Hoffa's own ambition made him a target too big to ignore? The tension peaked in early August when a tipster claimed Hoffa's body was buried under a driveway in a quiet Detroit suburb. The FBI descended with backhoes, tearing up concrete as reporters and onlookers crowded the scene, their pulses racing with the hope of a breakthrough. The cameras rolled, the air thick with anticipation. Would they find Hoffa's remains, a bullet-riddled corpse that would crack the case wide open? But as the dust settled, the driveway revealed nothing but gravel and disappointment. The crowd dispersed, the cameras turned away, and the case slipped back into the shadows, unresolved, taunting. The FBI kept digging, literally and figuratively, but each lead felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth, with no exit. What makes this chapter of Hoffa's disappearance so gripping is the sheer audacity of it. A man erased in broad daylight, in a busy suburb, with no one the wiser. The Machu's Red Fox parking lot became a stage for a crime so clean it felt supernatural, a vanishing act that defied logic and left investigators grasping at ghosts. For those who followed the case, it was a roller coaster of hope and heartbreak, each new clue a spark of excitement doused by the cold reality of dead ends. The public's fascination grew, fed by the allure of a mystery that seemed to pulse with danger and deception. Hoffa was gone, but his shadow lingered, a specter that promised answers just out of reach. As the FBI pressed on, chasing suspects and sifting through lies, the stage was set for a pursuit that would stretch across decades, each twist more maddening than the last. The summer of 1975 had barely cooled when the FBI's hunt for Jimmy Hoffa turned Detroit into a pressure cooker of suspicion and secrets. The air crackled with tension, as if the city itself knew it was hiding a truth too dark to unearth. The disappearance of the Teamsters Titan from the Machu's Red Fox parking lot on July 30th wasn't just a case. It was a wound, raw and bleeding, that drew every lawman, reporter, and conspiracy theorist into its orbit. The FBI's Hoffa's investigation, named with the cold precision of bureaucracy, was anything but clinical. It was a high-stakes chess game against an invisible opponent, a plunge into a world where loyalty was a lie, and every lead felt like a taunt from the shadows. For those watching, it was a spectacle that gripped the soul, equal parts thrilling and terrifying, a mystery that promised answers but delivered only questions. The FBI didn't waste time. By August 1st, 1975, their Detroit field office was a war room, maps of Bloomfield Township pinned to walls, phones ringing off the hook, and agents fueled by coffee and desperation. They knew the mob was behind it. Every instinct screamed it, but knowing and proving were worlds apart. The investigation zeroed in on the usual suspects: Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, the Detroit Mafia suave enforcer; Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a Genovese capo with a vendetta; and Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son whose maroon Mercury Marquis was the case's smoking gun. These men weren't just suspects, they were phantoms, slipping through the law's grasp with the ease of smoke. The public, glued to nightly news broadcasts, devoured every detail, their pulses racing at the thought of mob hitmen orchestrating a perfect crime. The pursuit kicked into high gear with a flurry of interrogations. Agents hauled in Giacalone first, his polished demeanor unshaken as he sat across from them at the Southfield FBI office. "I was at the athletic club, getting a massage," he said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. His alibi was airtight, too airtight, corroborated by club staff, who swore he'd been there all afternoon. Provenzano, questioned in New Jersey, was equally untouchable, claiming he'd been playing cards at a Teamster hall in Union City, surrounded by witnesses. The FBI pressed harder, leaning on their informants, street hustlers, low-level mobsters, anyone who might talk. A tipster whispered that Hoffa had been lured to a meeting to settle things with Provenzano, whose hatred for Hoffa had festered since their prison days. But whispers weren't evidence, and the mob knew it. Chucky O'Brien was the wild card. The FBI dragged him in, his eyes red from crying or fear, or both. "I'd never hurt Jimmy," he insisted, his voice cracking as he described Hoffa as a father. But his 1975 Mercury, seen by witnesses near the Red Fox, was a damning clue. Agents tore the car apart, finding a single hair in the back seat that early forensic tests suggested could be Hoffa's. The discovery sent a jolt through the case, a fleeting high that had reporters swarming and headlines screaming BREKHROUGH. But the hair wasn't enough. No DNA testing existed in 1975 to confirm it, and O'Brien's story held. He'd lent the car to a friend, he claimed, and hadn't been near the Red Fox that day. The FBI's hopes crumbled, the lead evaporating like a mirage. The investigation's tempo surged as tips poured in, each one a spark of promise that threatened to ignite the case or burn it out. A Teamster loyalist claimed he'd overheard Giacalone talking about taking care of Jimmy at a Detroit diner, but the witness clammed up when pressed, fear outweighing his conscience. Another tip led to a raid on a mob-connected garage in Hamtramck, where agents hoped to find blood, a weapon, anything. They found nothing but oil stains and silence. The FBI's frustration was palpable, their net closing on air. The public, meanwhile, was hooked, their imaginations running wild with images of Hoffa stuffed in a trunk, his body dissolved in acid, or buried under a construction site. Every rumor was a thrill, every dead end a gut punch. The drama peaked in September 1975, when a tipster, a jittery ex-con with mob ties, claimed Hoffa's body was buried at a landfill in Jersey City, New Jersey, owned by Provenzano's crew. The FBI mobilized, descending on the site with bulldozers and cadaver dogs, their flashlights slicing through the dawn mist. The media swarmed, cameras rolling as the nation held its breath. Was this it? Would they find Hoffa's remains? A grim answer to the mystery? The landfill, a sprawling graveyard of garbage, seemed the perfect mob hiding place. For days, agents dug through rotting trash, the stench choking their resolve, while onlookers whispered prayers or morbid bets. The climax came on day 3, when a dog alerted to a patch of earth. Hearts raced as shovels hit dirt, each clod a step closer to truth. But when the hole was emptied, there was nothing, no body, no bones, just the cruel laughter of another dead end. The resolution, if it could be called that, was a bitter pill. The landfill raid yielded no answers, only more questions. The FBI doubled down, wiretapping mob phones and leaning on informants. But the mob's code of omerta held firm. Giacalone and Provenzano never wavered, their alibis a fortress no agent could breach. O'Brien, despite the suspicious Mercury, was never charged, his tears and denials enough to keep him free, if not innocent. By late 1975, the case was stalling, the initial frenzy giving way to a grinding slog. The FBI expanded their net, questioning Salvatore Sal Bergoglio, Provenzano's right-hand man, and Gabriel Bergoglio, his brother, both Teamsters with blood on their resumes. They, too, gave nothing away, their smirks a silent dare to prove anything. What made the pursuit so electrifying was the dance between hunter and hunted. The FBI, armed with badges and righteousness, were outmaneuvered at every turn by men who lived in the shadows. Each interrogation, each raid, was a pulse-pounding gamble, a chance to crack the case or be humiliated by its silence. For the public, it was a front-row seat to a real-life thriller, where the stakes were a man's life and the truth was a prize just out of reach. The mob's evasion wasn't just skill, it was artistry, a masterclass in making a man vanish without a whisper. As 1975 drew to a close, the FBI's files grew thicker, their leads thinner, and Hoffa's ghost loomed larger, a specter that taunted with every empty search. The case wasn't over, but the trail was growing cold, leaving a nation enthralled and uneasy, hungry for the next chapter in a story that refused to end. The year 1975 bled into 1976, and the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa remained a gaping wound in America's psyche, a mystery that pulsed with dark allure. The FBI's Hoffa's investigation had churned through months of dead ends, mob alibis, and tantalizing whispers. Yet the truth about what happened in that Machu's Red Fox parking lot on July 30th, 1975, stayed maddeningly out of reach. The nation was hooked, their imaginations ablaze with visions of Hoffa's final moments, betrayed, silenced, erased by the cold machinery of the Mafia. Part 4 of this chilling saga dives into the elusive hunt for a capture, the fleeting hope of a confession, and an outcome that left more questions than answers, dangling like a lure to keep you craving the next twist. The story doesn't end here, it only deepens, and the shadows it casts will pull you back for more. The FBI's pursuit had become a high-wire act, balancing desperation with dwindling leads. By early 1976, agents were chasing ghosts across Detroit, Chicago, and New Jersey, their files bulging with theories, but starved of proof. The public, fed by a relentless media frenzy, hung on every development, their curiosity stoked by the seductive mystery of a man who vanished without a trace. Hoffa was larger than life, a Union king whose absence felt like a theft from history itself. The question wasn't just where he was, but how a man so powerful could be erased so completely. The answer, everyone suspected, lay with the mob, those untouchable titans of organized crime who seemed to mock the law with every dodged interrogation. The investigation's pulse quickened with a new lead in spring 1976, when a low-level Teamster named Ralph Picardo, facing jail time for racketeering, decided to talk. His words were a jolt of electricity, a spark that promised to ignite the case. Picardo claimed he'd overheard Salvatore Sal Bergoglio, a Provenzano enforcer, discussing Hoffa's fate at a New Jersey bar. According to Picardo, Hoffa had been lured to the Red Fox by the promise of peace with Anthony, Tony Pro Provenzano, only to be ambushed. Bergoglio, Picardo said, bragged that Hoffa was taken to a house in Detroit, killed, likely shot in the head, and his body disposed of in a way that ensured it would never be found. The method? A mob incinerator, possibly at Central Sanitation Services in Hamtramck, a facility tied to the Detroit Mafia. The story was chilling, vivid, and horrifyingly plausible, sending shivers through anyone who heard it. The FBI pounced, their excitement palpable as they raided the incinerator site, a grim industrial yard where the air reeked of ash and secrets. The media swarmed, cameras flashing as agents combed through heaps of debris, their faces taut with hope. This was it, they thought, the moment they'd find Hoffa's remains, or at least a trace of his DNA, to crack the case wide open. The public watched breathless, as headlines screamed, "Hoffa's grave found." The tension was unbearable, each shovelful of ash a step closer to a breakthrough, or another heartbreak. For days, the search dragged on, the nation's eyes glued to the scene, imagining Hoffa's final moments, betrayed by men he trusted, his body reduced to nothing in a fiery furnace. The climax came when a forensic team found bone fragments in the incinerator's ash pit. Hearts raced, pulses pounded. Had they finally found him? But the resolution was a gut punch. The fragments were too degraded for identification, and no definitive link to Hoffa could be made. The incinerator lead, like so many before it, collapsed into dust, leaving the FBI empty-handed and the public reeling. Picardo's story, while compelling, was hearsay, inadmissible without corroboration. Bergoglio, questioned again, smirked through his denials, daring agents to prove anything. The case teetered on the edge of collapse, but the FBI refused to quit, driven by the tantalizing possibility of a confession that could unravel the mob's wall of silence. The drama surged again in 1978, when Salvatore Bergoglio himself became a victim of the very world he inhabited. On March 21st, he was gunned down outside a New York diner, 2 bullets to the head. A mob hit as brazen as it was brutal. The timing was no coincidence. Bergoglio was set to testify in a Teamster corruption case, and whispers swirled that he'd been ready to talk about Hoffa to save himself. His death was a chilling message. The mob's reach was long, its patience short. The public devoured the news, their fascination spiked by the violence and the hint of a cover-up. Was Bergoglio silenced to keep Hoffa's secret buried? The question hung like a storm cloud, electrifying the case with fresh intrigue. Another flicker of hope came in 1982, when Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a Teamster hitman and Hoffa confidant, began dropping cryptic hints about his role in the disappearance. Sheeran, a hulking figure with ties to the Buffalino crime family, claimed in later years, most famously in his 2004 book I Heard You Paint Houses, that he'd been the one to kill Hoffa. His story was cinematic, Lured to a Detroit house by Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa was shot twice in the head by Sheeran, his body cremated at a mob-connected funeral home. The tale was gripping, dripping with betrayal and cold efficiency. But Sheeran offered no proof, and his confession came decades too late to test. The FBI investigated, tearing apart the alleged murder house at 17841 Bevelin Street, but found only traces of blood too old to analyze. Another high, another crash, another lead that dissolved into the ether. The outcome of the Hoffa case, or lack thereof, is what makes it so maddeningly seductive. No body was ever found. No one was ever convicted. The FBI's files grew to over 16,000 pages, a labyrinth of tips, interrogations, and theories. Yet not a single charge stuck. Anthony Giacalone died in 1982, Provenzano in 1988, both taking their secrets to the grave. Chucky O'Brien, hounded until his death in 2020, never broke, insisting on his innocence even as suspicion clung to him like damp rot. The mob's execution of Hoffa, most agree, was a masterstroke, clean, precise, untraceable. Theories multiplied. Hoffa's body crushed in a car compactor, dissolved in acid, or buried under Giant Stadium in New Jersey. A rumor so persistent it became legend. Each theory was a spark, igniting imaginations but offering no closure. The open-ended nature of this saga is its dark magic. Hoffa's absence is a void that invites speculation. Each new lead a siren's call to dive deeper. In 2004, a blood sample from that Bevelin Street house was tested with advanced DNA tech, raising hopes of a match, but it wasn't Hoffa's. In 2013, a tip from mobster Tony Zerilli led to a dig in a Michigan field, another media circus that unearthed nothing but dirt. Every search, every confession, every rumor keeps the mystery alive, a puzzle that refuses to be solved. The FBI officially declared Hoffa dead in 1982, but without a body, without a conviction, the case feels alive, pulsing with possibility. This isn't the end, it's a pause, a cliffhanger that leaves you hungry for more. What secrets did the mob bury with Hoffa? Who else knew the truth? And what might still be uncovered? The answers, if they exist, are out there, waiting in the shadows of Detroit's underworld or the whispers of a dying mobster. Stay tuned to this channel, because the next chapter of this chilling tale is coming, and it promises to pull you deeper into the enigma of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. The truth is close, tantalizingly close. Will you be here when it finally breaks?